Mary, a defense attorney went as far today as asking a judge to release this woman from custody, saying she's dealing with the trauma of the loss of her son, the same son who she is accused of beating to death for not doing his chores. There's a broken window at the home where police say a mother killed her 14-year-old son. A jail report says the woman told investigators her son did not complete his chores and she was angry. After an hour of beating the boy, police say he went unresponsive and the woman waited 5 minutes before calling 911. The boy went to the hospital where he died. The mother was booked into jail for murder.
Is she intending to come out? Oh, no, Your Honor.
At a bail hearing Friday afternoon, the mother refused to appear in court. Despite that, her public defender argued for her to be released from custody.
Given her limited history and the fact that it appears that she cooperated with law enforcement and the fact that she has very limited resources, I believe she should be released.
The defense attorney said the woman is in grief at the loss of the son she is accused of killing.
I acknowledge the seriousness of these facts, but this also involves a mother losing her son and significant trauma she's experiencing from that. I also argue there'll be additional trauma on top of that if she's incarcerated.
Police outlined the disturbing attack in a report, saying the woman mercilessly beat her child for an hour, including using an extension cord to spank him.
This assault happened over an hour. A 14-year-old child, extension cords. He struck his head, he lost consciousness, and she continued to beat him, and then failed to call for emergency services.
Neighbors we spoke to said they didn't know the family well and they hadn't seen any issues at the home until now.
It started like any other day, mundane tasks that every mother faces. Denaya Young, a 29-year-old mother of 4, had woken up to a chaotic house, the weight of responsibilities pressing down on her from every angle. A pile of laundry left unattended, dishes that had stacked up, and children who weren't helping around the house. Her frustration had been building for days, perhaps weeks now. The stress of managing a household, keeping things together, trying to balance her own needs with the relentless demands of her children, had finally reached a breaking point. By the time her 14-year-old son didn't finish his chores, something inside her snapped. The small disagreement over something so trivial became the straw that broke the camel's back. The anger, the sense of helplessness, and the pressure of being a single mother with so much on her plate came together in a tragic culmination. This simple household argument turned into an overwhelming moment of rage, and she started beating the boy, a beating that left her son with over 1,000 injuries and ultimately took his life. Denaya, in a frantic state, would later call 911, confessing that she had gone too far, but the damage had already been done. The question remains, could the immense weight of her stress have played a role in her unthinkable actions? How do you cope with the anxieties of life as a parent? Please share your insightful comments below and remember to subscribe to our channel as we will be covering not just crime news but the moral lessons we can gather from these true incidences. The story takes us deep into the city of Seattle. While known for its scenic views and vibrant culture, has seen its share of troubling statistics when it comes to crime. Violent crime rates have been rising steadily in recent years, with an uptick in assaults and domestic violence cases, much like the one Denaya Young became a part of. As the pressure to meet daily needs continues to grow, so too does the strain on many families, often leading to devastating consequences when those stresses remain unaddressed. In Seattle, domestic violence cases have seen a troubling rise, and this tragic incident serves as a stark reminder of how unchecked frustration and stress can escalate into violence. The city's response to these rising numbers has been to push for more support systems, including mental health resources and community intervention, but clearly, for some, that help arrives too late. Her son, 14 years old, had been assigned his chores, but on this particular day, he hadn't done them. Something about this moment seemed different. The small frustrations of the day, chasing after the kids, keeping up with the endless list of things to do, and the mounting sense of being overwhelmed, had been building up for days. These tensions, quietly simmering in the background, had been left unchecked. And when her son failed to do something as simple as completing his chores, the resentment, the anger, and the exhaustion boiled over. What started as a mother scolding her son for neglecting his duties quickly transformed into something unimaginable. At first, it was a shouting match, a verbal exchange between mother and child that most families experience. But for Denaya, it wasn't just about chores. She was angry, tired, and overwhelmed, and the small irritation became the outlet for all of that pressure. The details of the violence are chilling. Over the course of the next 3 hours, Denaya relentlessly beat her son. At least 1,172 injuries were found on his body by the medical examiner, each one a testament to the unrelenting nature of the attack. The brutality of the punishment became unbearable as Denaya's frustration and anger were released, not through words, but through violent physical force. As the violence escalated, 3 younger children, siblings who were far too young to comprehend the horror unfolding before them, were silently witnessing it all. The quiet, innocent lives of those children would be forever marked by what they saw that day. Yet they remained unable to intervene or stop the growing terror. They were just children, watching in silence, perhaps too frightened to speak, too confused to understand what was happening. Meanwhile, the boyfriend, who was present in the home, was just a few steps away. He heard it all: the sounds of the altercation, the shouting, and the desperate cries. But instead of stepping in, instead of trying to stop the violence, he chose to remain silent. He later told investigators, "I didn't want to get involved. What if I get hurt too?" His silence, his inability to act, left an even darker stain on the unfolding tragedy. How many lives could have been saved if he had simply intervened? Why did he stay silent, despite knowing what was happening? The hours dragged on, and by the time the violence finally stopped, it was too late. Denaya Young, exhausted from her outburst, had gone too far. Her 14-year-old son was dead. The house, which had once been filled with the chaos of daily life, now stood still, shattered by an irreversible act of rage. What drove Denaya to such extremes? What was it about that moment, about the failed chores, that turned a mother's frustration into a fatal explosion of violence? Not the only one. Was it just a mother snapping under the pressure? Or was there something deeper at play? Something that had been building for much longer than anyone had realized? As the police arrived, the full scope of the tragedy began to unfold. The reality of the crime, the unthinkable consequence of a mother's rage, became clear. The chilling truth: what began as a simple family argument had ended in a brutal, life-ending assault. How could a man, who was present and heard everything, choose to stand by while such brutality was happening? What was it that made him hesitate, making a choice that would leave the violence to escalate unchecked? It's a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, but at that moment, it seemed like the easiest choice to make. We've all seen it. The headlines about bystanders watching as someone is harmed, attacked, or even killed. And yet, for some, stepping in remains a near impossible action. Why? The boyfriend's choice, his unwillingness to act, brings into focus the complex psychological phenomenon known as the bystander effect. The bystander effect is a well-documented psychological response that occurs when people are less likely to offer help in an emergency situation when others are present. The more witnesses there are, the less likely any one individual is to intervene. It's a deeply ingrained survival instinct. People tend to look to others to see what they should do. In Denaya Young's case, her boyfriend was not the only who heard the violence. The 3 younger children in the house also witnessed what was happening, but they too were powerless to act. They were too young, too afraid, too overwhelmed by the situation to intervene. It's a paradox. People in the presence of violence may freeze, believing that someone else will step in, but in this case, no one did. The boyfriend's decision to remain passive, not to put himself at risk by intervening, raises serious questions about the human response to extreme situations. In cases of domestic violence, especially those involving intimate partners or family members, the lines between complicity and passivity is thin. The individuals closest to the situation may feel trapped in their own fear, not knowing how to stop the violence. They may fear their own safety. But whatever the reasons, the consequences of inaction can be devastating. We know from research in domestic violence and bystander intervention studies that fear of retaliation or harm is a strong factor in these situations. In some cases, the person witnessing the violence may even fear becoming a victim themselves, which leads them to disengage. The fear, however, can often be unfounded, as many victims are isolated, and the presence of a bystander can disrupt the aggression and prevent further harm. Denaya Young's hands shook as she dialed 911. Her voice, once so calm in everyday moments, was now frantic, broken. She spoke in a trembling whisper, her words laced with guilt and panic. "I went too far." Those words, simple yet heavy, would mark the point of no return. The moment when a mother realized the depth of the devastation she had caused. She had crossed a line from which there would be no turning back. In those few seconds, as the phone rang and the 911 operator's voice answered, everything Denaya had known about her life, about herself, began to crumble. The overwhelming surge of panic that flooded her mind was matched only by the crushing weight of what had just transpired in the hours prior. Her son, her 14-year-old child, was dead, and she was the one who had taken his life. The unrelenting physical punishment she had unleashed on her son during those 3 hours had claimed his life. The child she had once loved and nurtured now lay lifeless on the floor, a victim of her own hands. As the emergency dispatcher tried to calm Denaya, urging her to stay on the line, the reality of the situation began to settle in. It wasn't just the loss of her son. It was the loss of her future, her family, and the life she had once known. In those moments, there was no escaping the truth of what had unfolded. What should have been an ordinary day in the home had turned into a crime. A murder of unimaginable proportions. When the emergency responders arrived at the house, the scene they were met with was nothing short of heartbreaking. The house, usually a place of comfort and refuge, was now a crime scene. Broken objects, the remnants of a household turned chaotic, lay scattered around. The smell of fear and grief lingered in the air. And in the midst of the disarray was the lifeless body of Denaya's son, still, silent, and cold. The responders quickly assessed the situation, but it was clear that there was no saving the boy. His injuries were severe, his body marked by the brutal violence that had unfolded earlier. Denaya's world had shattered, and there was no escaping the aftermath of her actions. She had killed her own son. And now, everything she had known was gone. In Denaya Young's case, the pressures of motherhood, financial strain, and possibly mental health struggles created a perfect storm. When the stress of daily life becomes overwhelming, it can blur a person's judgment, leading them to act in ways they never thought possible. The dynamics between Denaya and her son, their escalating tension, could have been a silent precursor to the tragedy that unfolded. She is currently charged with second-degree murder and is being held on a $3 million bond. How do you cope with stress when dealing with your kids? Leave your comments below.